At an important client meeting, the kind that determines whether your company sinks or swims, the CEO's son pointed at me as if I were gum on the bottom of his shoe and yelled, "Leave now, Rachel. We don't need incompetent people here." It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't heat of the moment frustration. It was humiliation delivered deliberately, in front of our biggest potential client. Solvantis Global, the biotech giant negotiating a $4.2 billion systems contract with us. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I stood up, closed my laptop calmly, and walked out. Silence followed me down the hallway, the stunned kind, the kind that sticks to the walls. Everyone knew James was incompetent, but no one expected him to be suicidal enough to kick out the lead architect of the entire proposal. Me. Walking out wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Because if I had stayed, I would have said something that couldn't be undone. And after 10 years at HelionX Systems, I knew exactly how fast reputations travel, especially when they fall apart. What James didn't know was this. I was the only person with authority to certify the integration framework Solvantis required. Without that certification, the contract was invalid, meaning no signature, no deal. And James, who had been pretending all quarter that he led the initiative, had no idea how any of it actually worked. When I walked out, he had just detonated the foundation under his own feet. After the meeting, I returned to my office. I didn't slam the door, though the temptation was volcanic. Instead, I sat down, took a breath, and documented everything. Date, time, witnesses, exact phrasing. Not for HR. They were about as useful as a fire extinguisher filled with glitter. No, documentation was insurance. By 5 p.m., the whispers had started. By 6 p.m., I had already received 3 Slack messages from senior managers. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" The clients looked confused. "Did James really dismiss you?" And then one from the CEO himself, Chris Hale, short and stiff. "We'll talk tomorrow morning." I stared at the message. It didn't sound like a reprimand. It sounded like a man who just realized a fuse had been lit and was praying it didn't lead to his desk. That night, I didn't sleep much. I wasn't afraid of losing my job. I was afraid of wasting another decade protecting executives who couldn't spell integration mapping, let alone negotiate it. I had spent months building the Solvantis system architecture, coordinating teams across 3 continents, and rewriting half the technical spec myself after discovering James's draft looked like it had been written by a blender. I wasn't powerless. I was exhausted. But exhaustion disappears when opportunity knocks. At 7:42 a.m., my phone rang. James. I let it buzz twice before answering. "Rachel," he said, breathless. "I need you to come in immediately." No apology. No acknowledgement of yesterday. Pure panic. Then he added, "Solvantis is ready to finalize the $4.2 billion contract, but legal says we need your signature on the system certification before they can proceed." I leaned back in my chair. There it was. The moment arrogance meets reality. He continued, rushing, "I didn't realize the final compliance document has to come from you. So I need you to come sign. Right now. They're waiting." He expected me to drop everything. He expected me to save him, as I had done quietly for years. But something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not revenge, precision. I paused, letting the silence calibrate itself. Then I replied with 4 words he'll never forget. "That won't be happening." Not dramatic, not loud, just definitive. James sputtered. "What?" "Rachel, stop joking. This is urgent." I wasn't joking. Yesterday, he had publicly stripped me of authority. Authority that he suddenly realized he needed. "You dismissed me from the project," I said evenly. "You stated in front of the client that I was incompetent and not required. So I'm honoring your request." He was quiet for a full 5 seconds. Then the panic cracked through the phone. "Rachel, please. This is career-ending. My father—" "Your decisions," I said, "have consequences." I hung up. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because for the first time in 10 years, the balance of power had shifted, and James had handed me the lever himself, and I intended to use it. The moment I hung up on James, the office felt strangely quiet, even though I wasn't there. It was the quiet that comes right before a building alarm goes off. My phone didn't ring again, but Slack lit up like a city skyline. Rachel, did something happen? James looks like he swallowed a stapler. Sylvantis is asking for status updates. No one knows what to tell them. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because anything I wrote in haste would later become someone else's weapon. Silence in corporate warfare is not passive. It's strategic. By 8:30 a.m., an email finally arrived. Not from James this time, but from his father, CEO Chris Hale. Subject: Meeting request, 9 a.m. sharp. No greeting, no explanation, just a summons. I left my apartment 10 minutes later, not rushing, not dragging my feet. I walked into headquarters at 8:58 and could feel the tension before the elevator doors even opened. Assistants were whispering. Department heads were pacing. And on the top floor, outside the executive boardroom, James was waiting. He stood up the moment he saw me. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his hair slightly out of place, and there was a sheen on his forehead that hadn't been there yesterday. "Rachel," he said, swallowing hard. "I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday." Wrong foot. That's what he called publicly insulting the project lead in front of a multi-billion-dollar client. "We need to go in together," he continued, lowering his voice. "If we present a united front, we can smooth this over. My father respects cohesion." I stared at him. "You threw me out of the meeting." "That was a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "High stress, miscommunication. You know how presentations get." I let him talk, watching the narrative form in his head. He was trying to rewrite history before we even walked through the door. Typical. He wasn't afraid of losing the contract. He was afraid of losing his role in the contract. Sylvantis had already asked why the architect wasn't present after the outburst. Their team was not known for patience. "Rachel," he said again, "just follow my lead." "I follow facts," I replied. Before he could retort, the boardroom doors opened. The CEO stood inside, arms crossed, jaw tight. He wasn't a man who raised his voice often. He didn't need to. Chris Hale had a presence that filled a room the way a storm front fills a sky. "Both of you," he said. "Inside." We walked in. The CFO, Chief Legal Officer, and 2 senior engineers were already seated. A screen displayed a paused video feed. Sylvantis waiting on the other end of the line. Chris pointed to 2 chairs on opposite sides of the table. Deliberate. The moment I sat down, he turned to James. "Explain what happened yesterday." James straightened his posture. "There was a conflict in the meeting. Rachel became overwhelmed by the client's questions, and I stepped in to maintain control. She chose to leave." Every person in that room knew that was a lie. The engineers shifted uncomfortably. Legal blinked twice. The CFO raised an eyebrow. Chris's gaze slid to me. "Rachel?" I kept my voice calm, measured. "I left because James ordered me to leave," he stated, and I quote, "We don't need incompetent people here. In front of the clients." James inhaled sharply. "That's out of context," I continued. "I also left because the documents he presented to Sylvantis included technical specifications I neither wrote nor approved. They were inaccurate, misleading, and in 2 sections, dangerously so." The CFO turned toward James slowly. "Is that true?" James opened his mouth, but the words jammed somewhere between his ego and his panic. I reached into my folder and slid a printed page across the table. Here is a side-by-side comparison of the approved architecture and the version presented yesterday. The room fell silent as executives leaned in to read. A diagram on the left showed the verified integration flow. The one on the right, James's, contained a routing sequence that would overload 3 of the client's systems during deployment. It wasn't sabotage. It was incompetence pretending to be innovation. The legal officer spoke first. If Solvantis had implemented this, they could have sued for damages. Chris turned darker, his jaw clenching once. And, I added, James is aware that only my certification finalizes the contract. He called me this morning demanding I sign immediately. I didn't demand, James tried. You said, I corrected. Come sign right now, they're waiting. No one in the room moved. Even the HVAC hum felt distant. Chris clasped his hands together. James, step outside. That voice, the one he rarely used, left no room for negotiation. James stood up slowly, shoved back his chair, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a dull, heavy click. The CEO exhaled once, quietly. Rachel, he said, turning toward me, tell me exactly what we're dealing with. And for the first time, he was ready to listen. Chris didn't rush me. He didn't gesture impatiently or check his watch. He simply folded his hands and waited, which told me one thing. The situation was far worse than he'd let on. CEOs don't suddenly rediscover listening skills unless the ground is already cracking beneath them. I walked him through the facts methodically. How James had revised the technical specs without review. How he dismissed me in front of Solvantis. How he tried to force my signature afterward. I didn't add emotion, exaggeration, or speculation. In high-stakes environments, facts are enough. They do their own damage. When I finished, Chris leaned back, rubbing his forehead. We can't proceed with Solvantis under false pretenses, he said. If they detect even one inconsistency, they'll walk. This deal is critical. Critical was an understatement. The company's quarterly forecast had already hinted at slowing growth. Solvantis wasn't just a large contract, it was a lifeline. The CFO cleared his throat. The client has emailed 3 times since 8 this morning asking for clarification on your absence, Rachel. They want confirmation that the systems architect is aligned with what was presented. And I'm not, I said plainly. Chris nodded grimly. I suspected as much. Then he did something unexpected. He turned to the legal officer. What are our liability risks if we continue with James's documentation? High, she replied. Very high. Their in-house compliance team is thorough. They'll discover discrepancies immediately. If they interpret any part of it as intentional misrepresentation... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Corporate survival is built on quiet math. Risks versus consequences. Numbers versus time. Chris exhaled slowly. Rachel, I need you to stabilize this. Not the contract. The truth. He wasn't asking for loyalty. He was asking for accuracy. For someone to clean up the mess without creating a bigger one. I'll need full access to the proposal files, I said, and I want 2 engineers assigned to me for verification. Done. And, I continued, I will not work under James's direction. That line hung in the air. Everyone knew what it meant. Chris nodded once. You won't? There it was. The shift. The moment leadership finally recognized where the actual competence lived. He stood. I'll speak with Solvantis. They're waiting on the video call. You'll join me in 10 minutes to clarify technical discrepancies. Only technical. Leave the personnel issues out of it. We resolve those internally. Agreed. Personnel issues were no longer my problem. When I stepped into the hallway, James was pacing near the window, chewing on the skin of his thumb. He straightened when he saw me. What did you tell them? The truth? I said. His face fell. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Solvantis is threatening to delay signing. My father thinks I jeopardized the deal. You did. I was under pressure. His voice cracked. They were pushing timelines and you weren't in the room to back me up. I stared at him. That was your choice. He looked like someone trying to rearrange a collapsing tower with bare hands. Rachel, if I lose this deal, I lose everything. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Leadership is not measured by how loudly you speak, but by how deeply you understand the consequences of your actions. And James understood nothing. The boardroom door opened. Chris stood there, expression unreadable. Rachel, inside. James took a step forward. Dad, what about me? You'll stay out here, Chris said without looking at him. The door closed. The finality of the latch was louder than any argument James could have made. Sylvantis appeared on the screen. 3 executives, all sharp-eyed, all waiting. Their lead strategist, a woman named Lena, spoke first. Rachel, we were concerned when you left yesterday. We want to ensure the technical framework accurately reflects your design. It doesn't, I said. But I can correct it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in respect. Sylvantis valued directness the way surgeons value precision. No fluff, no theatrics. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through revisions, highlighted errors, and clarified what was salvageable. I didn't mention James once. This was a technical discussion, not a performance review. When we finished, Lena nodded. Thank you for the transparency. We'll review your corrections. If everything aligns, we can proceed with formal approval tomorrow. Chris glanced at me, then back at the screen. You'll have our updated draft within the hour. The call ended. Chris closed his laptop slowly. You just saved this company, he said. But the internal situation remains. James's actions can't be ignored. I met his gaze. Then don't ignore them. A long silence followed. Then he spoke quietly. I won't. He dismissed the executives. As I reached the door, he added, Rachel, prepare for changes. Not a warning, not a threat. A forecast. Something in HelionX was about to break wide open, and James wasn't ready for what was coming. By the time I left the boardroom, the office atmosphere had shifted. People moved with the stiff, cautious energy of professionals who sensed a storm forming, but didn't yet know where it would land. Engineers whispered near the glass partitions. Project managers hovered by the printers, pretending to review documents they weren't actually reading. HelionX wasn't a dramatic company. Internal chaos usually happened behind closed doors, but whatever was happening now was too large to hide. Word travels quickly when one executive is pacing the hallway and another is in a closed-door meeting with the CEO. I returned to my workspace, the same desk I'd occupied for almost a decade. My inbox was filling by the minute. Requests for clarifications, questions about dependencies, updates from engineering leads who suddenly realized their entire workflow depended on the corrected architecture. The work was familiar, grounding even, but the tension beneath it was new. At 11:15 a.m., I received a calendar notification. Meeting Compliance Review. CEO, CFO, Legal, Rachel Hale. 12 p.m. James's name was absent. That alone told me more than any conversation could have. Before the meeting, I headed to the server room to retrieve archived logs. On the way, Chloe from engineering caught up to me. She looked nervous. Rachel, is everything okay? She asked. People are saying James messed up the client meeting. I appreciated her caution. HelionX employees didn't usually speak openly about leadership. There were inaccuracies in the presentation. I said carefully. They needed correction. Chloe swallowed. Were they serious inaccuracies? Yes. Her eyes widened slightly. She understood enough. Let me know if you need help verifying data. I can run dependency checks. That offer meant more than she knew. It also confirmed how badly teams wanted real leadership, not performative authority. Thank you, I said. I'll reach out soon. At noon, I walked into the compliance review meeting. Chris was already seated, along with the CFO, the legal officer, and an HR representative I hadn't seen in years. Not a friendly one. The kind HR brings when documentation becomes evidence. The CFO began. We've examined the discrepancies between the approved architecture and what was shown to Sylvantis. This isn't minor. It's structural misrepresentation. Legal added, We also reviewed email records. There's clear indication that James bypassed required approvals and presented unverified material as finalized. She slid a folder toward Chris. He opened it, scanned a page, then looked at me. This, he said quietly, could have resulted in a catastrophic breach of contract. He wasn't exaggerating. Solvantis projects affected thousands of downstream systems. Errors at scale are exponential, not linear. Rachel, he continued, are you confident you can restore full technical alignment before tomorrow? Yes. I didn't hesitate. Confidence isn't arrogance when it's backed by readiness. But I'll need uninterrupted authority to correct every part of the proposal. You'll have it. His gaze hardened. Effective immediately. HR took a note. The CFO leaned forward. One more matter. There are concerns James pressured you to sign off on documents that were not accurate. I met his eyes. He did. Do you have record of this? Yes. They didn't ask to see it. Not yet. The fact that I answered without hesitation said enough. The meeting ended with a clear directive. My corrections were now the official path forward. The contract lived or died on whether I could deliver accuracy by morning. But accuracy wasn't the only thing being decided today. Consequences were coming. I returned to my desk and focused entirely on the architecture corrections. Hours blurred as I cross-checked databases, validated system flows, and rewrote deployment maps. 2 engineers joined me, running simulations and confirming metrics. For a while, it felt almost normal, except for the constant movement outside my office door. Around 4 p.m., the door to the CEO's office opened sharply. Voices echoed down the hallway. One calm, one desperate. Chris's was the calm one. James's was not. I didn't misrepresent anything, James insisted. I streamlined it. That's innovation. You bypassed protocol, Chris replied, and you dismissed your lead architect in front of a client. You compromised the entire deal. I was trying to show leadership. You showed recklessness. A beat of silence. Then James said something so soft I almost missed it. Dad, please. There it was, the real fear behind all the bluster. Chris's voice didn't soften. Your actions have consequences, James. You will not be part of the Solvantis project moving forward. And pending a full internal review, your employment is suspended. Suspended. That word hit the office like a dropped glass. James didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply walked toward the elevators without looking at anyone. For the first time since I met him, he looked small. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Chris appeared in my doorway. Rachel, he said, finish your corrections. Solvantis will review at 9 a.m. tomorrow. After that, we'll discuss your next steps here. He didn't specify what those steps were, but I already had an idea. Hellion X was changing, and for once, the change wasn't built on bluster. It was built on truth. And truth was finally being allowed to lead. By the next morning, I was operating on caffeine, adrenaline, and a level of focus I hadn't felt in years. The corrected architecture stood open across 3 monitors, each component validated, documented, and tied to a verified system chain. No shortcuts, no improvisation, no creative liberties disguised as innovation. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into the executive boardroom with the final draft, printed and bound. The atmosphere was taut but controlled. Chris sat at the head of the table, the CFO beside him, legal on standby. They weren't anxious. They were prepared. That alone marked a shift. The Solvantis liaison appeared on screen. Lena greeted us with her usual calm professionalism. Morning, everyone. Are we ready to proceed? I nodded. Yes, all previous discrepancies have been reconciled. This version reflects the approved architecture and deployment requirements in full. We walked through the document line by line. Every time Lena asked a question, I had the answer ready, supported by logs, previous iterations, and system validations. Nothing vague, nothing speculative. When we reached the end, she folded her hands. Thank you, Rachel. This aligns with our expectations. Provided we receive the signed certification, Solvantis is prepared to finalize the contract this afternoon. Chris didn't speak immediately. He looked at me with a question in his eyes, silent but unmistakable. Are you willing to sign? I was. Not because of loyalty to the company, but because the work was right again. It reflected the efforts of the engineers, analysts, and teams who had built every line of code with integrity. I'll sign, I said. Send the final version. Relief rippled around the table. The CFO closed his eyes briefly, probably calculating the revenue impact. Legal began drafting follow-up documents, and Chris leaned back, letting the tension in his shoulders drop for the first time in days. When the call ended, he stood. Everyone except Rachel. Give us a moment. The room cleared quickly. When the door closed, he rested his palms on the table. You carried this project, he said. Not just this week. For years. He wasn't flattering me. Chris was not a man who layered compliments. He stated facts. I've reviewed your team evaluations, he continued. Your project recoveries. The audits you conducted when no one asked you to. The quiet corrections you made to protect our clients. He paused. And I've reviewed how often those corrections were overwritten, ignored, or redirected. That last line landed heavily. It wasn't just about James. It was about the culture that let him operate unchecked. I won't allow that to continue, he said. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. Employees shifting below, unaware of how close Helionex had come to unraveling. I'm restructuring the technical division, he said, effective immediately. We need someone who understands risk, clarity, and accountability. Someone the teams already trust. He turned toward me. I want you to take over as Director of Systems Architecture. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because the weight of the moment deserved silence. 10 years of work, buried frustrations, dismissed warnings, they all converged into this single offer. I'll accept, I said, on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. I want authority over process enforcement, clear documentation standards, and the right to refuse sign-offs if protocols are bypassed. A faint smile crossed his face. That's not a condition. That's the job. Word spread fast. Engineers congratulated me. Analysts stopped by my new office, James's old office, offering quiet support. Even team leads who had rarely interacted with me before expressed relief. They wanted structure, predictability, leadership based on competence, not inheritance. I didn't celebrate. There wasn't time. I had transition plans to outline and a department to stabilize. But at 2:14 p.m., as I finalized resource alignments, my phone buzzed. James. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. His voice was strained. Rachel, I need to talk to you. I'm in the middle of restructuring, I said. I know, Dad told me. He inhaled sharply. Please, I need your help. They want my statement about the proposal. Legal says I have to provide details, and they said my actions may have violated compliance standards. They did, I replied. Silence pressed through the line. Then he said quietly, You could fix this. You always fix things. Not this time. Rachel, he whispered, tell me what to do. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't express anger. Instead, I repeated the same words that marked the turning point of all of this. 4 words he had heard once already, but never truly understood until now. That won't be happening. He didn't respond. He didn't plead again. The line went dead. By 4 p.m., Solvantis received the certified documentation. An hour later, they signed the contract. Helionex secured the biggest deal in its history. Not because of authority, not because of pedigree, but because truth finally had room to work. As I locked my new office for the day, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, clear, prepared. The company wasn't perfect, but for the first time, it was moving in a direction that made sense. And I was finally leading it.